Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, where hope flickers like a dying candle against the vast emptiness of space, there exists a force that defies all logic, all reason, and all natural law. They are not driven by ideology or grand schemes of cosmic dominion. They do not seek to rule the galaxy through careful strategy or political manipulation. They exist for one purpose, and one purpose alone: war. Not war as a means to an end, but war as the end itself. War as religion. War as culture. War as the very reason for existence. They are the Orks, the Greenskins, and they are one of the most terrifying threats the galaxy has ever known. Not because of their cunning, though some possess it. Not because of their technology, though it somehow works despite all physical laws suggesting it shouldn't. But because they are perfect engines of destruction, created by ancient hands to be the ultimate warriors. And in a galaxy consumed by endless conflict, perfection in warfare is perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. When we think about the great threats facing the Imperium of man in this age of darkness, we often imagine the calculated malice of chaos, the cold efficiency of the Necrons, or the all-consuming hunger of the Tyranids. But there's something uniquely terrifying about the Orks. They don't need a reason to fight. They don't require motivation or morale. They simply are, and in being, they fight. It's encoded into every cell of their bodies, woven into their very genetic structure, by beings so advanced that even now, millions of years after their disappearance, we struggle to comprehend their works. The Orks number in the trillions, or perhaps more. They infest every corner of the galaxy like a fungal bloom that can never truly be eradicated. Destroy an Ork army, and you've accomplished nothing but a temporary setback. The spores they release in death will spawn new generations, each learning from the experiences of their predecessors through genetic memory. Burn an entire world to ash to prevent Ork infestation, and you may find that a single spore survived, drifting on stellar winds to seed a new threat decades or centuries later. They possess a power that other races cannot replicate, a collective psychic phenomenon that allows them to reshape reality through sheer belief. If enough Orks believe something to be true, it becomes true. This isn't metaphor or superstition. This is measurable, observable fact. Their vehicles work because they believe they should work. Their weapons fire because they expect them to fire. Red-painted machines go faster because every Ork knows that red makes things faster. This Gestalt psychic field grows stronger with every Ork that adds to it, creating a feedback loop that makes large Ork gatherings exponentially more dangerous than their numbers alone would suggest. In this exploration of Ork power, we're going to journey through their ancient origins, examine the biological perfection that makes them such formidable warriors, understand the psychic phenomenon that allows them to bend reality itself, explore their society and the fearsome clans that compose it, marvel at their impossible technology, meet the legendary warlords who have brought entire sectors to their knees, and witness the campaigns that have shaped galactic history. By the end, you'll understand why the Orks are not simply one threat among many, but perhaps the single most persistent and ineradicable danger the galaxy has ever faced. So settle in, prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of the green tide, and let's explore what makes these brutal, savage, and somehow magnificent creatures such an enduring force in the eternal war that defines existence in the 41st millennium. The Ancient Forge. Origins of the Krork. To understand the power of the Orks, we must first travel back through the mists of time, back beyond the age of the Imperium, beyond even the golden age of human expansion, to an era so ancient that its true history has been reduced to fragments and myths. We must go back more than 60 million years, to a time when the galaxy was young and very different powers held sway. In this primordial age, a race known as the Old Ones ruled vast territories of space. These beings were the first sentient species to achieve mastery over the material universe, and their understanding of life, energy, and the fundamental forces of reality was so profound that they could reshape worlds and create new forms of life with casual ease. They were not merely scientists or genetic engineers. They were something far beyond either, beings whose works would echo through millions of years and shape the fate of countless species yet to come. But the Old Ones were not alone in their mastery. Another ancient race, the Necrontyr, had achieved their own form of power through technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. These two civilizations, each supreme in their own way, came into conflict. But the war that followed would be known as the War in Heaven, and it would nearly tear the galaxy apart. The Necrontyr had made a terrible bargain with star-devouring entities known as the C'tan, transforming themselves into living metal bodies and becoming the Necrons, an army of deathless warriors with technology that could unmake reality itself. The Old Ones, despite their mastery of life and the warp, found themselves facing an enemy that could not be permanently killed, that felt no fear or pain, and that wielded weapons capable of extinguishing stars. In their desperation, the Old Ones turned to their greatest skill, the creation of life. They had already created several psychically gifted races to serve as soldiers and allies in their war. The Eldar, graceful and powerful, were perhaps their greatest success, but the Eldar, for all their potential, were not numerous enough, not aggressive enough, not single-minded enough in their purpose. The Old Ones needed something different. They needed warriors who would never question, never hesitate, never need motivation beyond the simple joy of combat. They needed the perfect soldiers, and so they created the Krork. The Krork were everything the Old Ones needed them to be. They were massive creatures, some standing as tall as 12 meters in height, towering even over the space marines that would come into existence millions of years later. They were incredibly strong, capable of tearing through armor with their bare hands. They regenerated from wounds that would kill any normal being. They bred rapidly through a spore-based reproductive system that required no technology or infrastructure to maintain. And most importantly, they were utterly fearless and completely devoted to warfare. But the Old Ones didn't stop at merely creating powerful bodies. They encoded knowledge directly into the Krork genetic structure, creating what would later be called the technogene. This genetic programming meant that Krork would instinctively know how to fight, how to operate weapons, how to speak their own language, and even how to construct the technology they would need for war. This wasn't learned behavior passed down through culture or teaching. This was information written into their very DNA, ensuring that even a newly spawned Krork would possess the fundamental knowledge needed to be an effective warrior. The Old Ones also gave the Krork something else, as something that would prove crucial to their effectiveness and their danger, a latent psychic ability that manifested not as individual power, but as a collective gestalt field. When Krork gathered together, this field would strengthen, allowing them to accomplish feats that should have been impossible. It was a tool, a weapon, a means of ensuring that their creations could fight effectively, even when cut off from support or supply lines. The Krork served their purpose admirably. They fought the Necrons and their C'tan masters with savage efficiency, and while they couldn't permanently destroy the deathless machines, they could delay them, tie them down, force them to focus resources on dealing with these green-skinned berserkers rather than pressing their advantage against the Old Ones' other forces. But the War in Heaven did not end well for anyone. The Old Ones were eventually defeated, their civilization shattered and scattered. The C'tan were betrayed by their Necron servants and shattered into shards. The Necrons themselves entered a great sleep, sealing themselves in tomb worlds to wait out the ages until the galaxy had recovered from the devastation of the war. And the Krork, their creators gone and their purpose fulfilled, were left alone in a galaxy full of ruins and ashes. What happened next is perhaps one of the most fascinating examples of evolutionary regression in galactic history. Without the Old Ones to maintain and guide their development, Without the constant pressure of fighting an enemy as formidable as the Necrons, the Krork slowly devolved. Generation by generation, they became smaller, less intelligent, as more fractious and disorganized. The great unity that had allowed them to coordinate their efforts against the ancient foe broke down into tribal warfare and internal conflict. But they never lost the core of what they were. They remained warriors, still driven by the genetic imperative to fight, still breeding through spores, still possessing that latent psychic field. They just became messier, less refined, more crude. They became Orks. In a strange way, this devolution might have been the greatest gift the Old Ones could have given the galaxy, though it certainly wasn't intentional. The Krork, at their full power, were terrifyingly effective warriors, but they were also organized, coordinated, and united in purpose. Had they remained at that level of capability, they might have conquered the galaxy long ago. Instead, yet their devolved form spends most of its time fighting amongst itself, only occasionally gathering into forces large enough to threaten major civilizations. But the echo of what they once were remains encoded in their genetic memory. Every so often, conditions arise that allow an Ork to grow closer to the ancient Krork ideal. The biggest and most successful war bosses, particularly those who fight the longest and most successful campaigns, begin to approach the stature and capability of their ancient ancestors. They grow larger, their intelligence increases, their strategic thinking becomes more sophisticated. They become living reminders that the Orks are not simply savage brutes, but the devolved remnants of what was once the Old Ones' most successful warrior race. And sometimes, very rarely, something even more remarkable occurs. As an Ork emerges who isn't just big and smart and powerful, but who seems to channel something deeper, something that connects directly to that ancient heritage. These Orks become known as the Beast, a title that carries weight across the entire galaxy. The most recent and most terrifying example occurred in the 32nd Millennium, when a collection of Prime Orks nearly destroyed the Imperium of Man in what would be remembered as the War of the Beast. The Old Ones are gone, lost to history and time. Their great works lie in ruins, and most of their creations have either perished or declined. But the Krork, in their devolved form as Orks, remain. They spread across the galaxy like a green tide that can never be turned back, infesting every corner of space with their spores. They fight and die and spawn new generations, each one carrying within its genetic code the echo of beings who fought star gods and helped shape the fate of the galaxy. This is the legacy of the Orks. They are not accidents of evolution or random mutations that happen to be successful. They are purpose-built weapons, created by a race that understood life and warfare so deeply that they could craft the perfect soldier. The fact that these perfect soldiers have devolved into crude, brutal savages doesn't make them less dangerous. If anything, it makes them more insidious, because their very crudeness disguises the sophisticated biological engineering that makes them so effective. The Old Ones are dead, but their greatest weapon endures. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, that weapon has found an environment perfectly suited to its design. The Orks are home, in a sense. This age of endless conflict is exactly what they were made for, and they are very, very good at their purpose. The living weapon, biology of perfection. If you were to sit down and design the perfect organism for sustained warfare across the galaxy, you might end up creating something very much like an Ork. Every aspect of their biology, from their cellular structure to their reproductive system, is optimized for one thing: fighting. They are, quite literally, living weapons. Understanding how they work, how they grow, how they survive and thrive is essential to understanding why they represent such an intractable threat to every other species in the galaxy. Let's begin with perhaps the most immediately striking feature of Ork biology. They are green, not metaphorically. That's not as a cultural choice of face paint or decoration, but genuinely, fundamentally green. Their skin is green, their blood is green, and the reason for this is both elegant and terrifying. Orks are not, despite their appearance, purely animal in nature. They are a hybrid organism, part animal and part fungus, and this fusion gives them capabilities that no purely animal life form could possess. The fungal component of ork biology serves multiple crucial functions. First and foremost, it allows them to photosynthesize. That distinctive green color comes from chlorophyll in their blood and skin, the same pigment that allows plants to convert sunlight into energy. This means that orks can supplement their diet by simply standing in sunlight. They still need to eat, and they certainly enjoy eating. But they can survive in environments where food is scarce simply by absorbing solar radiation. This makes them incredibly difficult to starve out, a fact that has frustrated countless military commanders trying to besiege ork positions. The fungal nature of orks also grants them remarkable regenerative capabilities. Where a human might die from blood loss, an ork's fungal systems can seal wounds rapidly, sometimes within hours. Injuries that would cripple most species are mere inconveniences to an ork. They can lose limbs and, given time, regrow them. Their bodies can recover from damage that should be fatal because the fungal component can compensate for destroyed tissues and organs. Some particularly tough orks have been observed fighting effectively even after receiving wounds that had destroyed major organs. Yet their hybrid nature makes them astonishingly difficult to kill. This fungal-animal fusion also simplifies their internal anatomy considerably. Where humans and other purely animal species require complex arrangements of organs to maintain life, orks have streamlined these systems. The fungal component handles many functions that would normally require specialized organs, allowing orks to reduce the number of critical vulnerabilities in their bodies. They still have a brain, a heart, and other major organs, but the fungal systems can keep an ork alive and fighting even when these organs are damaged. But perhaps the most significant aspect of ork biology, and the one that makes them nearly impossible to permanently eradicate from a world once they've taken hold, is their reproductive system. Orks don't reproduce sexually. They don't need mates, don't form family units, don't require any social structure or technology to propagate their species. They reproduce through spores. Throughout their entire lives, orks continuously release small amounts of spores into their environment. These spores are microscopic, hardy, and can remain viable for extended periods. They drift on wind currents, settle in soil, and lie dormant until conditions are right for growth. When an ork dies, whether from combat, accident, or old age, though few orks live long enough to experience that, their body releases a massive burst of spores. This final explosive dispersal can contain millions of individual spores, each one capable of growing into a new organism. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Ork spores don't all grow into orks. Instead, they grow into a complete ecosystem of orkoid life forms, each type suited to a specific role in supporting the larger ork society. The smallest organisms to emerge from the spores are squigs, bizarre and varied creatures that range from tiny parasites to massive beasts. Squigs serve multiple purposes. They can be food, they can be weapons, they can even be living ammunition for certain ork guns. Some are harmless and kept as pets or food animals. Others are ferocious predators used in combat. The variety of squig subspecies is staggering, and all of them spring from the same spore systems that create orks. Next come the snotlings, tiny green creatures barely intelligent enough to perform simple tasks. Snotlings cultivate the various fungi that grow alongside ork spores, creating food sources and tending to the ecosystem. They're not warriors in any meaningful sense, though they can be surprisingly vicious when cornered. Think of them as the foundation of the ork food chain, the little maintenance workers that keep the whole system running. Above the snotlings are the Gretchen, or grots, as they're commonly called. Gretchen are larger than snotlings, but still much smaller than full orks, standing perhaps waist-high to an average human. They're more intelligent than snotlings, and serve as laborers, assistants, ammunition carriers, and occasionally as cannon fodder. Gretchen are treated as lower-class citizens in Ork society, subject to casual abuse and exploitation, but they're also absolutely essential to the functioning of Ork settlements and armies. They do the work that Orks are too impatient or too busy fighting to bother with. Finally, when given sufficient time and resources, the spores mature into full Orks. A newly spawned Ork emerges already possessing basic knowledge encoded in its genes. It can speak the Ork language, understands the fundamentals of fighting, and has an instinctive grasp of where it fits in the social hierarchy. This genetic programming, the legacy of the Old One's techno-gene, means that Orks don't need lengthy periods of childhood or extensive education. They're ready to fight from the moment they're large enough to hold a weapon. This entire ecosystem, this complete support structure, emerges automatically from the same spores that an Ork releases when it dies. You cannot purge Orks from a world by simply killing all the Orks. You have to eliminate every single spore, and given how many spores a single Ork releases in death, this is virtually impossible without completely sterilizing the planet. Some worlds that were battlegrounds for Ork conflicts thousands of years ago still have feral Ork populations living in remote areas, descendants of spores released by long-dead warriors. There's another crucial aspect of Ork biology that sets them apart from most other species. They grow throughout their lives, and their growth is directly tied to their success in combat and their social status. When an Ork fights and wins, it literally becomes bigger and stronger. This isn't just a matter of building muscle or gaining confidence. Something in their biology responds to victory and dominance by triggering additional growth. An Ork that fights frequently and successfully will rapidly outgrow its peers. This creates a natural, brutally efficient hierarchy within Ork society. The biggest Orks are, by definition, the most successful fighters. They've won more battles, survived longer, and proven their strength repeatedly. Other Orks instinctively recognize this and defer to the larger individuals. There's no need for complex social structures or government systems. Leadership is determined by size, and size is determined by success in combat. At the bottom of this hierarchy are the boys, your average Orks, standing perhaps 7 to 8 feet tall and built like walking slabs of muscle. They form the bulk of any Ork army, countless numbers of green-skinned warriors eager for a fight. Above them are the nobs, Orks who fought long enough and successfully enough to grow significantly larger than their peers, young perhaps 9 to 10 feet tall and proportionally more massive. Nobs lead groups of boys and enforce the will of the war boss through a combination of intimidation and casual violence. At the very top of the hierarchy stands the war boss, the biggest Ork in the tribe or warband. A successful war boss might stand 12 feet tall or more, a towering figure of muscle and violence that dominates all those around it through sheer physical presence. But war bosses aren't just big, they're also smart, at least by Ork standards. There's a correlation between an Ork's size and its intelligence. As they grow, they become not just stronger but also more cunning, more capable of complex thought and planning. This is perhaps one of the most terrifying aspects of Ork biology. The most dangerous Orks aren't just the strongest, they're also the smartest. A truly successful war boss, like Gazgukul Mag Uruk Thraka, can exhibit strategic thinking and tactical acumen that would be impressive in any race. The fact that this intelligence is paired with the raw physical power of an Ork in its prime makes such individuals extraordinarily dangerous. The Ork's robust physiology also grants them remarkable resistance to disease, toxins, and environmental hazards. Their hybrid biology can adapt to hostile conditions that would kill most other species. They can survive in the vacuum of space for short periods, function in extremely high or low temperatures, and shrug off radiation levels that would be lethal to humans. This makes them effective combatants in nearly any environment, from frozen ice worlds to burning desert planets to the void of space itself. Their pain tolerance is equally remarkable. Orks feel pain, but they don't process it the way most species do. To an Ork, pain is simply feedback. information about damage rather than a reason to stop fighting. This isn't because they're too stupid to understand danger. It's because their nervous systems are wired to prioritize combat effectiveness over self-preservation. An orc will continue fighting with injuries that would incapacitate most warriors, only stopping when actual physical damage prevents movement. All of these biological advantages combine to create an organism that is perfectly suited for perpetual warfare. Orcs don't need supply lines because they can photosynthesize and consume nearly any organic matter. While they don't need time to train new warriors because their genetic programming gives them basic combat knowledge from birth. They don't need complex medical facilities because they regenerate naturally. They don't need careful population management because their spore-based reproduction automatically maintains their numbers. From a purely biological perspective, the orcs are perhaps the most successful warrior species the galaxy has ever produced. They're not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest, but they're strong enough, fast enough, and smart enough. And they combine these attributes with a reproductive system that makes them nearly impossible to eliminate, and a biological structure that lets them thrive in conditions that would destroy most other civilizations. The old ones designed them well, too well, perhaps. As because in creating the perfect soldiers, they created a species that doesn't need civilization, doesn't need technology, doesn't need anything beyond the spores they release and the enemies they fight. Orcs can regress to feudal or even Stone Age levels and still survive, still spread, still pose a threat. They're not dependent on maintaining any particular level of technological or social development. They simply are, and in being, they fight. This biological perfection makes them one of the most persistent threats in the galaxy. You can defeat an orc army, reclaim a world from orc occupation, and declare victory. But unless you've eliminated every single spore, you haven't really won. You've just set the timer on the next orc infestation, and given enough time, enough conflict, those new orcs will grow into just as much of a threat as the ones you defeated. The orcs are the green tide, and the tide never truly retreats. It just pauses between waves, building strength for the next surge. And in a galaxy where war is constant and conflict inevitable, that tide will always have somewhere to crash against, always have new enemies to fight, always have fresh opportunities to prove the brutal efficiency of their design. They are living weapons, forged in ancient days but never growing dull, never becoming obsolete. The old ones created them to fight, and fight they do, with a joy and enthusiasm that makes their battles all the more terrible. Because for an orc, war isn't a burden or a necessity or even a choice. War is simply what they are, and in the grim darkness of the far future, being perfect at war is perhaps the most terrifying evolutionary advantage any species could possess. When belief becomes reality, the Gestalt psychic field, there is a force that flows through orc society, invisible to the naked eye, but as fundamental to their existence as blood or breath. It's a power that defies the careful laws of physics, that laughs at the universe's rigid rules about what is and isn't possible. It's a phenomenon that has baffled Imperial scholars, confounded tech priests, and forced even the Eldar to reluctantly acknowledge the strange genius of the Old One's design. This force is the Orc Gestalt psychic field, and it is perhaps the single most important factor in understanding how orcs function as a species, and why they're such a persistent threat to the galaxy. But the fundamental principle of the Gestalt field is elegantly simple and profoundly strange. If enough orcs believe something to be true, reality itself will bend to accommodate that belief. This isn't metaphor or superstition. This is measurable, observable fact that has been documented in countless encounters with greenskin forces. Orc weapons that should not fire do so because the orcs believe they will. Orc vehicles that should fall apart under their own weight instead thunder across battlefields because their crews expect them to work. Orc technology that looks like piles of scrap somehow functions because the Gestalt field makes up for the fundamental mechanical impossibilities. To understand how this works, we need to delve briefly into the nature of the warp, the Imperium. That roiling sea of psychic energy that exists parallel to real space. The warp is responsive to thought and emotion, shaped by the collective consciousness of sentient beings throughout the galaxy. The Chaos Gods are perhaps the most extreme example of this principle. Entities born from concentrated emotion and belief, given form and power by the countless beings who feel fear, rage, hope, or excess. But the warp's influence on reality isn't limited to creating gods or demons. It can also affect the material universe in more subtle ways. Psychic individuals can draw on warp energy to produce effects that defy physical laws. The Eldar weave it into their technology. Human psychers channel it to read minds or throw lightning. And Orks, collectively, unconsciously, use it to make their expectations become real. While individual Orks don't have strong psychic abilities, at least not in the traditional sense, they can't read minds or throw fireballs or teleport. What they have instead is a latent connection to the warp that, when combined with the connections of other Orks, creates a field effect. This field grows stronger in direct proportion to the number of Orks in proximity to each other. A single Ork, alone, generates a negligible psychic field. 10 Orks together create a measurable effect. 100 Orks begin to noticeably influence their immediate environment. 1,000 Orks can perform minor miracles. And when millions of Orks gather for a great crusade, the Gestalt field becomes strong enough to reshape reality on a massive scale. This is how Ork technology functions. When Imperial forces capture Ork weapons and attempt to use them, they often find that these weapons are nothing more than assemblages of scrap metal, crude mechanical parts, and components that couldn't possibly work as intended. Bolter shells that are too large for the barrel, power sources that couldn't generate sufficient energy, structural elements that lack the tensile strength to hold together under stress. And yet, in Ork hands, these same weapons fire with devastating effectiveness. The Gestalt field makes up the difference. It's not that the weapons work without any mechanical function at all. There is a basis of crude engineering, a framework that approaches functionality. But the Gestalt field pushes that framework across the threshold from almost works to actually works.
You know, I've been covering Warhammer lore for quite a while, and I have to say, the Orks are probably my favorite faction to research. Not because they're the most powerful or the most complex, but because there's something genuinely brilliant about their design. Like the old ones basically said, what if we made the perfect soldier that never needs anything and just did it? And the really fascinating part, the Orks don't even know how terrifying they actually are. They're just out there having the best time, completely oblivious to the existential threat they represent. Every other faction is dealing with complex motivations and tragic backstories, and the Orks are just like, fighting is fun, let's do more of that. There's something almost refreshing about that simplicity, even though it's absolutely horrifying when you really think about the implications. But anyway, let's get back.
It's the psychic equivalent of adding a bit of string and duct tape, except the string and duct tape are made of warp energy and belief. This extends to the famous Ork belief about colors. Orks know, with a certainty that admits no doubt, that red vehicles go faster. This isn't because red paint has any physical properties that increase velocity. It's because every Ork knows that red equals speed, and when enough of them believe this, the Gestalt field makes it true. Red-painted Ork vehicles genuinely do go faster than identical vehicles painted other colors, not by a huge margin, but by enough to be noticeable and tactically relevant. Similarly, yellow explosions are bigger because Orks believe yellow means a bigger boom. Blue is lucky, so Orks painted blue do seem to have better fortune in combat. Purple is sneaky, you rarely see purple Orks because if you paint an Ork purple, it becomes harder to spot. But these effects aren't dramatic enough to create invincible armies or allow teleportation, but they're real, measurable, and tactically significant. An army of red-painted vehicles will close range faster than expected. Yellow ammunition does hit harder. blue orcs do seem to survive situations where they should have died. The Gestalt field also plays a crucial role in orcs' social structure and organization. Orcs can instinctively sense the psychic presence of other orcs, and larger, more successful orcs generate a stronger psychic signature. This allows orcs to immediately recognize who's bigger, and therefore who's in charge. There's no need for badges of rank or formal command structures. Every orc can feel the relative power of those around them through the Gestalt field, as creating an automatic hierarchy based on psychic presence that correlates directly with physical size and combat prowess. This instinctive awareness also helps explain how orc armies function despite their apparent lack of discipline or organization. Orcs don't follow orders in the conventional sense. They don't have detailed battle plans or coordinate their movements through careful communication. Instead, they follow the psychic momentum of the Gestalt field. When a war boss decides to attack, that intention ripples through the Gestalt field, and every orc in range feels the pull toward action. They charge not because they've been commanded to, but because the field itself is drawing them forward. This makes orc armies surprisingly difficult to predict and counter. They don't follow logical tactical doctrines or predictable patterns, whereas they follow the flow of psychic energy through their collective consciousness, shifting and adapting in ways that seem random, but are actually responsive to the subconscious desires of thousands or millions of warriors, all feeding into the same Gestalt field. It's like trying to predict the movement of a mob, except the mob has a psychic hive mind, pushing it in directions determined by collective instinct rather than individual thought. There's a special class of orcs called weird boys, who have a more direct and dangerous relationship with the Gestalt field. While normal orcs generate and passively benefit from the field, weird boys actually channel it directly. They're the orc equivalent of psykers, though they function very differently from human psykers or Eldar farseers. Weird boys don't draw power from the warp through individual will. Instead, they act as lightning rods for the collective psychic energy of nearby orcs, channeling the raw power of the Gestalt field into devastating attacks. The problem with being a weird boy is that this makes them incredibly dangerous to themselves and everyone around them. When orcs get excited about fighting, which is essentially always, their psychic energy spikes. A weird boy, surrounded by battle-eager orcs, becomes overcharged with Gestalt energy, like a capacitor being fed more power than it can handle. If they can't release this energy through psychic attacks, it will simply explode out of them, usually in lethal ways. Weird boys have been known to spontaneously combust, have their heads explode, or accidentally teleport entire groups of orcs into solid rock. And this makes weird boys both extremely valuable and extremely unpopular among other orcs. They can channel the Gestalt field into powerful attacks, like blasts of green lightning that can melt through tank armor, or psychic screams that burst the heads of enemy soldiers. But they're also prone to catastrophic failures that can kill everyone nearby, friend and foe alike. Most orcs give weird boys a wide berth, simultaneously valuing their power and fearing their instability. When orcs gather in truly massive numbers for the great crusades that shake entire sectors, the Gestalt field becomes powerful enough to affect not just orc technology, but the orcs themselves. The collective psychic energy makes individual orcs stronger, faster, and more durable. It enhances their regeneration, sharpens their instincts, and fills them with a battle fury that makes them nearly unstoppable. This is the true danger of a massive orc gathering, not just that there are millions of warriors, but that each of those warriors is enhanced by the collective power of all the others. The field also seems to have a gravitational effect on orcs throughout the galaxy. When a truly powerful gathering begins to form, when a war boss of sufficient strength starts to assemble a great crusade, orcs light years away feel the pull. They don't consciously understand what they're feeling, but they know that somewhere there's a fight worth traveling to. They abandon whatever minor conflicts they're engaged in and head toward the source of that psychic beacon, adding their own strength to the field and drawing even more orcs to the growing maelstrom. This creates a feedback loop that can snowball with terrifying speed. A moderately successful war boss might command tens of thousands of orcs. The gestalt field from this force makes each individual orc slightly more effective, allowing them to win more battles and attract more followers. As the force grows, the field strengthens, making victories easier and attracting still more orcs. Given the right conditions and a sufficiently charismatic war boss, this process can continue until millions or even billions of orcs are gathered under a single banner, their collective psychic field strong enough to warp reality in measurable ways. This is what makes the Great Orc Crusades so terrifying. It's not just the overwhelming numbers, though those are certainly dangerous enough. Or it's that each warrior in that horde is being enhanced by the gestalt field generated by all the others. They're stronger than they should be, tougher than they have any right to be, and backed by technology that shouldn't work but does, because millions of orcs believe it will. The Imperium has tried, repeatedly, to find ways to counter the gestalt field. If you could suppress it, disrupt it, prevent orcs from benefiting from this collective psychic enhancement, you could dramatically reduce their combat effectiveness. Unfortunately, the field isn't something that can be easily targeted or disrupted. It's not generated by a specific organ or device. It's an emergent property of orc consciousness itself, the cumulative effect of millions of latent psychic connections operating simultaneously. Sisters of Silence, the anti-psyker warriors of the Imperium, have some effect on the gestalt field through their blank nature, their absence from the warp creating dead zones where the field cannot operate. But even they can only affect a small area, and the sheer number of orcs in a typical crusade means that the loss of the field in one small section of the battlefield has minimal overall impact. The gestalt field simply flows around the blank zones like water around rocks in a stream. Some Imperial scholars have theorized that the gestalt field is actually what keeps orcs from being truly unified as a species. When orcs aren't gathered in large numbers, when they're spread out in small tribes and warbands, the field is weaker, and they spend their time fighting each other. This internal conflict prevents them from organizing on a galactic scale. But when they do gather in sufficient numbers, the field becomes strong enough to overwhelm their natural inclination toward infighting, focusing all that aggression outward, toward external enemies. It's a balancing act, encoded into their very nature. Too spread out, and they're not dangerous enough to threaten major civilizations. Too concentrated, and they become an existential threat. The gestalt field is, in many ways, the most elegant aspect of the Old One's design. They could have simply created stronger, faster, smarter warriors. But instead, they created warriors who become more effective through simple proximity to each other, who unconsciously work together through a psychic field that requires no conscious coordination, who make their crude weapons and vehicles function through collective belief. Or the field turns orc weaknesses into strengths and amplifies their natural advantages to terrifying degrees. Understanding the gestalt field is crucial to understanding why orc tactics, which appear suicidally reckless from an outside perspective, actually work. When an orc charges into battle with complete disregard for danger, it's not being stupid. It's responding to the pull of the gestalt field, which is telling it that success is not just possible, but likely because all the other orcs are equally confident. That confidence, multiplied across thousands or millions of warriors and reinforced through the psychic field, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They believe they'll win. The field makes them stronger for believing it, and that increased strength makes victory more likely, which reinforces the belief, and which strengthens the field further. It's a beautiful, terrible cycle, and it's one of the primary reasons why the orcs have never been truly defeated, despite countless attempts to eliminate them. You can kill orcs, destroy their armies, burn their settlements to ash, but as long as some survive and continue to believe in their inherent superiority, as long as they gather in sufficient numbers to generate that field, they'll always be dangerous. The gestalt psychic phenomenon isn't just a combat advantage. It's the very thing that makes orcs what they are. The invisible force that binds them together and makes them more than just another warrior species. In the grim darkness of the far future, where reality itself is under constant assault from the forces of chaos, where the warp bleeds into real space and demons walk among mortals, now the fact that orcs can bend reality through collective belief doesn't seem quite so strange. It's simply another expression of how the warp influences the material universe, another example of how consciousness and reality are more closely intertwined than the laws of physics would suggest. The orcs just do it unconsciously, automatically, as a fundamental part of their existence. The old ones understood something profound about the relationship between mind and matter, between belief and reality. They understood it well enough to encode that understanding into a species' genetic structure, creating a race that doesn't just fight in the material universe, but that subtly reshapes that universe to favor their victory. And in doing so, they created perhaps the most persistently dangerous warrior species the galaxy has ever known. But because how do you defeat an enemy that makes itself stronger simply by believing it's strong? How do you plan against opponents whose weapons work because they expect them to work, regardless of physical possibility? The answer, unfortunately for every other species in the galaxy, is that you can't. Not permanently, not completely. The Gestalt field ensures that as long as there are orcs, there will be danger. As long as they gather, they'll be formidable. And as long as they believe in their own might, that belief will be reinforced by the very physics of their existence, making them just strong enough, just tough enough, just lucky enough to endure. The green tide rises, and beneath it flows a current of psychic energy that makes that tide nearly impossible to stem. Well, a galaxy of green, society, and the clan system. To truly understand the orcs, we must look beyond their biology and psychic abilities to examine how they organize themselves, how their society functions, and what drives their behavior beyond simple combat instinct. While it would be tempting to dismiss orc culture as primitive or simplistic, the truth is more nuanced. Orcs have a complex social structure that, while brutally straightforward in many ways, contains surprising depth and serves their nature as warriors remarkably well. At the most fundamental level, orc society operates on a principle that is absolutely democratic in its simplicity. Might makes right. The biggest, strongest orc is in charge. There are no elections, no councils, no complex legal frameworks. If you're bigger than everyone else, you're the boss. If someone else grows bigger than you, they become the boss, usually by beating you in a fight. This system has the advantage of being completely transparent and meritocratic. Leadership is earned through combat prowess, and any orc who feels they're strong enough can challenge the current leadership. Of course, if they lose that challenge, they're likely to be killed or at minimum severely injured, which tends to discourage frivolous challenges. The basic building block of orc social organization is the mob, a group of orcs led by a nob who's big enough to keep the others in line. Mobs are relatively fluid, forming and dissolving based on circumstance and the strength of individual members. A nob who loses fights or fails to provide good opportunities for violence will find his mob deserting him for stronger leaders. Conversely, as a nob who consistently leads his boys to victory and good fights will attract more followers, his mob growing as other orcs seek to join the winning side. Multiple mobs together form a warband, led by a warboss who's managed to intimidate or defeat all the nobs in his area. A successful warboss might control several warbands, forming a tribe. And a truly exceptional warboss, one who's grown large enough and won enough victories to establish dominance over multiple tribes, becomes a warlord. The largest gathering of all, when a warlord becomes so powerful that they draw orcs from across entire sectors to their banner, is what we call a Great Crusade, though the orcs themselves have a different, much more guttural name for it. But overlay on this simple hierarchy of strength, orcs also organize themselves by clan. While the clan system is ancient, possibly dating back to the Krork themselves, and it represents cultural traditions that persist even when tribes form and dissolve. An orc belongs to a clan not because of where they were born or who their parents were. Orcs don't have parents in any meaningful sense, but because of the psychic resonance they feel with other members of that clan. It's as if the clan identity is encoded in the spores that spawn them, a cultural memory passed down through genetic code rather than teaching. There are 6 major clans that appear across the galaxy in virtually every orc population. The Goths, the Bad Moons, the Evil Suns, the Death Skulls, the Blood Axes, and the Snakebites. Each clan has its own distinct culture, preferences, and way of fighting. Understanding these clans is essential to predicting orc behavior, as clan affiliation often determines tactics and equipment choices. The Goths are perhaps the archetypal orcs, the ones that most closely embody the popular image of orc warriors. They are the biggest, the meanest, the most aggressive of all the clans. Goths pride themselves on their combat prowess, particularly in close-quarters battle. They favor brutal melee weapons, massive cleavers, huge hammers, power claws that can tear through armor like paper. A Goth believes that the best way to fight is to get close to the enemy and beat them to death with your bare hands or your favorite chopper. They look down on guns as somewhat cowardly, though they'll still use them because, well, who doesn't like a good shootout before the real fun begins? Goths paint everything black and white in a checkered pattern, creating armies that look like mobile checkerboards covered in spikes and skull symbols. They're obsessed with being tough, with proving their strength through constant fighting. A Goth's idea of a good time is finding the biggest, scariest enemy on the battlefield and charging straight at them. This makes them predictable in some ways. They're always going to try to close to melee range, but it also makes them incredibly dangerous because they're very, very good at close combat. Many war bosses come from the Goths, simply because Goth culture produces the biggest, strongest warriors. The Bad Moons represent the opposite end of the spectrum in many ways. They're the wealthy clan, the Orks with the most teeth. Now, you might be wondering how Orks, who seem to care only about fighting, developed a monetary system. The answer is both elegant and disgusting. Ork teeth. Ork teeth grow continuously throughout their lives and fall out regularly to be replaced by new teeth. These lost teeth are hard, durable, and completely standardized in value. They can't be counterfeited because they're biological. They're easy to carry. And everyone always needs more because you can never have too many guns, and guns cost teeth. Bad Moons are special because their teeth grow faster than other orcs' teeth. This makes them naturally wealthy, able to accumulate teeth more quickly than their peers. And because they have more teeth, they can afford better equipment. A Bad Moon's army is a sight to behold. Every vehicle is painted bright yellow to show off their wealth. Every orc is carrying the biggest, flashiest gun they can afford. And everything is covered in gold-painted decorations and trophies. They're the arms dealers of the orc world, trading weapons and equipment for teeth, growing rich off the constant demand for bigger and better implements of destruction. This might make them sound cowardly or weak, more interested in accumulating wealth than fighting. But that would be a mistake. Bad Moons are still orcs, and they love a good fight as much as any greenskin. They just prefer to fight from behind the biggest, loudest guns money can buy. They favor massive firepower over close combat, fielding more shooters, big shooters, and even def guns than other clans. They'll happily stand back and blast the enemy to pieces from a distance, secure in the knowledge that they can always buy more ammunition. The Evil Suns are the speed freaks of orc society. Well, they are absolutely obsessed with going fast. They don't just like fast vehicles. They need speed the way other species need air. Evil Suns paint everything red because, as every orc knows, red makes you go faster. They have more mech boys than most other clans because they need constant mechanical support to keep their ramshackle vehicles running and to squeeze every possible bit of speed out of their engines. An Evil Sun's army is built around mobility. They favor war bikes, buggies, trucks, any vehicle that can close distance quickly. They hate slow, methodical warfare. They want to get stuck in as fast as possible, racing across the battlefield in a thunder of poorly maintained engines and flying metal. They're not particularly concerned with tactics or careful planning. Their strategy is simple: go fast, hit hard, keep moving. But this makes them incredibly aggressive and difficult to pin down. But it also makes them somewhat reckless. Evil Sun's casualties are often higher than other clans because they charge into danger without much concern for what they're charging into. The Death Skulls are the scavengers and looters of Orc society. They're painted blue, which Orcs believe is lucky, and they certainly seem to need that luck because they're constantly pushing their chances. Death Skulls are notorious thieves and pirates, not just among other species, but even among their fellow Orcs. They'll loot anything that isn't nailed down, and if it is nailed down, they'll pry up the nails and take those too. Other Orcs call them thieving gits, but they're also grudgingly respected because Death Skulls always seem to have the best salvaged equipment. Whereas this culture of looting makes Death Skulls incredibly adaptable and well-equipped. They field a bizarre assortment of captured weapons, looted vehicles, and improvised equipment cobbled together from dozens of different sources. A Death Skull mob might include Orcs carrying Imperial lasguns next to others with Eldar shuriken catapults, all led by a nob riding a looted Space Marine bike. They make excellent use of their captures, and their mech boys are particularly skilled at jury-rigging equipment from multiple sources into something that at least sort of works. The Blood Axes are perhaps the most controversial of all the Orc clans, because they do something that other Orcs consider deeply suspicious. They think before they fight. Blood Axes have been known to use actual tactics like camouflage, cover, coordinated attacks, and even retreating when a position becomes untenable. They've learned these tactics by fighting against, and sometimes alongside, humans. This makes them incredibly dangerous because they combine Orc physical toughness with something approaching human tactical sophistication. Other Orcs call Blood Axes sneaky gits and don't entirely trust them. The idea of not charging directly at the enemy, of hiding and waiting for the right moment, strikes most Orcs as vaguely cowardly. But Blood Axes don't care what other Orcs think. They know that their methods work, that using tactics leads to victory, and victory is what matters. They paint their gear in camouflage patterns, though by camouflage they usually mean slightly less visible green, and they'll actually use things like scouts and flanking maneuvers. And at the snakebites are the traditionalists, the Orcs who cling to the old ways and view much of modern Orc technology with suspicion. They use as little machinery as possible, preferring to fight with simple weapons like clubs, axes, and bows. They ride into battle on enormous boars or other squig beasts rather than in vehicles. They practice crude forms of shamanism and believe in portents and omens. Other Orcs consider them backwards and primitive, but snakebites are tough in ways that even other Orcs respect. There's a purity to the snakebite approach. They rely on their natural Orc strength and resilience, rather than on technology that might break down at crucial moments. They fight in close combat because that's where an Orc is most effective. They maintain a closer connection to the natural Orc ecosystem of squigs and fungi. But in some ways, they're closer to what Orcs were before they started building machines and forming larger civilizations. They're feral, savage, and absolutely brutal in combat. Beyond these major clans, there are also freebooters, Orcs, who've left their original clans to become pirates and mercenaries. Freebooters are often more cosmopolitan than other Orcs, having traveled widely and fought against many different enemies. They're led by captains rather than war bosses, and they form crews rather than tribes. Freebooters sail the void in ramshackle fleets, raiding wherever they can find a good fight and good loot. They dress flamboyantly, often adopting human pirate aesthetics with massive hats, coats covered in trophies, and enough guns to arm a small warband. The clan system provides structure and identity to Orc society beyond the simple hierarchy of size and strength. It gives Orcs a sense of cultural continuity and tradition. Even when tribes dissolve and new warbands form, clan allegiances remain constant. An Orc knows what it means to be a Goth, or a Bad Moon, or an Evil Suns, and that identity shapes how they fight, what equipment they prefer, and how they interact with other Orcs. This cultural diversity within Orc society also makes them more adaptable as a species. Different clans excel in different situations. The Goths might be perfect for brutal close-quarters fighting in hive cities. The Evil Sons are ideal for open terrain where their speed can be fully utilized. The Blood Axes can handle complex military operations that require actual coordination. The Bad Moons can provide the firepower needed to crack fortified positions. This variety means that Orc forces are rarely one-dimensional, rarely dependent on a single tactical approach. It's worth noting that despite their cultural differences, Orcs from different clans rarely fight each other when there are other enemies available. Clan rivalry exists, certainly. There's plenty of friendly competition and the occasional brawl, but when a major crusade begins, when a war boss of sufficient power calls for a gathering, Orcs from all clans will answer. The Gestalt field and the lure of a proper fight override clan divisions. A great crusade might include Goth warriors, Bad Moons gunlines, Evil Sons outriders, Deathskull looters, Blood Axes scouts, us and Snakebite beast riders all working toward the same goal, finding the best fight possible. This unity and diversity is another strength of Orc society. They don't waste energy on ideological conflicts or political struggles. They don't fragment into warring factions over philosophical differences. They fight each other when there's nothing better to fight. But the moment a worthy opponent appears, all that internal conflict evaporates and the Orcs unite against the external threat. It's a level of social cohesion that more civilized species struggle to achieve, despite all their sophisticated political systems. The clan system also preserves useful knowledge and traditions across generations. Mechboy knowledge is passed down through the Bad Moons and Deathskulls who trade in technology, as speed-building techniques are maintained by the Evil Sons. Close combat tactics are refined by the Goths. The Blood Axes preserve the tactical lessons they've learned from fighting humans. And the Snakebites maintain the ancient traditions and old ways that other clans might have forgotten. Each clan serves as a repository of cultural knowledge, ensuring that useful practices and techniques aren't lost, even when individual Orcs die. In many ways, Orc society is admirably efficient. There's no bureaucracy to slow decision-making. No need for complex systems of resource allocation. Just take what you need, or take it from someone weaker. No lengthy debates about strategy. The war boss decides, and everyone follows. Leadership succession is handled simply and quickly through combat. Cultural traditions are preserved genetically and reinforced through clan identity. Everything is streamlined for one purpose, making Orcs effective warriors. And yet, for all its brutal simplicity, there's a certain functional complexity to how Orc society operates. The interplay between individual ambition, clan culture, tribal hierarchy, and the psychic influence of the Gestalt field creates a social system that's simultaneously chaotic and organized, savage and sophisticated, prone to infighting, yet capable of remarkable unity. It's a society perfectly adapted to its purpose, refined over millions of years to produce warriors who can fight effectively with minimal support structure, who can rebuild after losses with terrifying speed, and who actually enjoy the process of constant warfare that would break most other species. The Orcs don't need philosophers to tell them how to live. They don't need politicians to organize their society. They don't need priests to give them purpose. They know, instinctively, what they are and what they're meant to do. And their clan system, their hierarchy based on strength, their culture that celebrates combat above all else, all of it serves that fundamental purpose. They are warriors, born and bred and genetically designed for war, and their society reflects that reality with perfect clarity. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Orcs have found their paradise. They live in a galaxy-wide battlefield, where there's always someone new to fight, always a fresh challenge to test their strength against. Their society is perfectly adapted to this environment because it was literally created for it, as the old ones gave them not just powerful bodies and useful abilities, but a culture and social structure that would allow them to thrive in conditions of perpetual conflict. And thrive they do, spreading across the stars like a green plague, bringing their simple, brutal joy to every world they touch. Engines of destruction, the impossible machines of the mechs. When you first see an Ork vehicle, your initial reaction might be laughter. These machines look like the fevered dreams of a scrapyard, assembled by creatures with more enthusiasm than sense. Weapons are welded to surfaces with no apparent regard for balance or aerodynamics. Armor plates are riveted on in haphazard patterns, leaving gaps that expose crucial mechanical systems. Engines belch black smoke from exhausts that seem to point in random directions. When the whole contraption rattles, groans, and shakes like it's moments away from falling apart. And yet, impossibly, it works. Not just works, but performs at levels that should be impossible given the apparent quality of construction. Ork vehicles thunder across battlefields at speeds that should tear them apart. Ork guns, which look like pipe dreams assembled from scrap metal, fire with devastating accuracy and power. Ork aircraft, which violate so many principles of aerodynamics that they should never leave the ground, roar through the sky with crude effectiveness. This is the miracle and the horror of Ork technology. It works because Orks believe it will work, and that belief, channeled through the Gestalt field, makes up for every mechanical shortcoming. At the heart of Ork technology are the mech boys. Are Orks born with an innate understanding of mechanical principles? They're not engineers in the traditional sense, having never studied theory or learned design principles. Instead, they possess genetic knowledge, the techno-gene legacy of the old ones, that gives them an instinctive grasp of how machines should work. A mech boy looks at a pile of scrap and sees potential. They can visualize how pieces might fit together, not through careful calculation, but through intuitive understanding that's wired into their very DNA. Mech boys are absolutely essential to Ork society. Without them, the crude machines that Orks depend on would fail even more frequently than they already do. Mech boys maintain vehicles, repair weapons, and most importantly, build new technology from whatever materials are available. They're constantly tinkering, improving, and inventing, driven by a compulsion that's as much a part of their nature as the urge to fight is for other Orks. The most talented mech boys become big mechs, technical masters who command teams of lesser mech boys and countless Gretchen assistants. Big mechs are responsible for the most impressive examples of Ork engineering. The massive stompers and gargants that stride across battlefields like walking fortresses, the force fields that protect important Ork installations, and the most custom weapons that war bosses use to establish their dominance. Let's start with the basics of Ork ground vehicles. The Ork truck is perhaps the most common vehicle in any Ork army. A flatbed transport that looks like someone took a modern truck, stripped away everything that wasn't essential, welded on armor plates wherever they could be bolted, and mounted the biggest gun that would fit on the back. Trucks have no suspension to speak of, minimal protection for the driver, and steering that's best described as enthusiastic. They carry squads of Orks into battle at breakneck speeds, bouncing over terrain that should flip them, crashing through obstacles that should stop them dead, and somehow delivering their passengers mostly intact and ready to fight. Battle wagons are the larger cousins of trucks, massive vehicles that combine transport capacity with serious firepower. A battle wagon might carry 20 Orks plus several weapons platforms, all protected by thick armor that's more impressively heavy than it is well designed. They're built like bunkers on wheels, slow but unstoppable, grinding through enemy positions while disgorging warriors directly into combat. But the interesting thing about battle wagons is that no two are exactly alike. Each one is a custom creation, built to the specifications of the war boss or big mech who commissioned it, incorporating whatever weapons and equipment were available at the time of construction. For Orks who value speed over protection, there are the various types of war buggies and war bikes. These are perhaps the most emblematic of Ork engineering philosophy. Take the minimum frame necessary to mount a big gun, add the biggest engine you can find, skip most of the safety features, and paint it red to make it go faster. Warbikes are terrifying to watch in action. They have no governors, no speed limiters, barely any brakes. They rely on the durability of Orks to survive the inevitable crashes that come from piloting vehicles that prioritize velocity over control. What the Evil Suns clan, in particular, has perfected the art of building speed-focused vehicles. Their war buggies are stripped down to the absolute essentials: a frame, wheels, an engine, a weapon, and a seat. That's it. Everything else is considered unnecessary weight. These vehicles can hit speeds that would turn a human pilot into paste, but Orks, with their enhanced durability and regenerative capabilities, can handle the G-forces and occasional crashes that result from pushing these machines to their limits. Then we come to the really impressive Ork vehicles, the ones that demonstrate just how far the Gestalt field can push the boundaries of what's mechanically possible. Def Dreads are basically Ork dreadnoughts, walking weapons platforms that combine thick armor with devastating close-range firepower. Yes, they're piloted by Orks, who've been permanently installed into the machine, wired directly into the controls through crude surgery and even cruder mechanical interfaces. The pilots of Def Dreads are usually Orks, who are too badly injured to fight effectively, but too tough to die, so they're given a new metal body to continue their war. Killer Cans are smaller versions of Def Dreads, often piloted by Gretchen. These walking weapons are less durable than Def Dreads, but faster and more maneuverable. They're perfect for harassing enemy positions, attacking from unexpected angles, and generally causing chaos. The fact that they're piloted by Gretchen, who are not known for their courage, is offset by the fact that once you're sealed inside a Killer Can, your options are limited to fighting or dying. Though this tends to make even cowardly Gretchen fight with desperate effectiveness. But the true masterpieces of Ork engineering are the Stompers and Gargants, massive walkers that dwarf most other vehicles on the battlefield. A Stomper is essentially a small building that walks, a towering engine of destruction bristling with weapons and armor. They're built to resemble the Ork gods, Gork and Mork, with massive torsos, arms ending in huge weapons, and heads studded with gun platforms. Inside a Stomper, dozens of Orks might be working the various weapons and systems, all coordinating their efforts to keep this massive machine moving and firing. Stompers are incredibly loud, incredibly violent, and incredibly effective. They stride across battlefields, crushing anything in their path, their weapons blazing away at maximum firepower. Yeah, the sound alone is enough to terrify enemies. The ground shakes with each step. Smoke billows from the massive engines required to keep these things moving. And yet, for all their apparent crudeness, they work. They shouldn't be able to balance on two legs given their construction, but they do. Their weapons shouldn't be able to hit anything given the lack of sophisticated targeting systems, but they do. The Gestalt field makes up for every engineering shortcoming. Gargants are even larger than Stompers, rivaling Imperial Titans in size and firepower. These massive walkers are rare, requiring enormous amounts of resources and the coordinated efforts of multiple big mechs to construct. A Great Gargant might stand as tall as an office building, mounting weapons that can destroy fortress walls or knock aircraft from the sky. They're powered by crude but effective reactors, protected by force fields generated through a combination of captured technology and mech-boy ingenuity, and controlled by a war boss who sits in a command throne, directing the various gun crews and maintenance teams. The weapons are particularly fascinating. A Gargant might mount a belly gun, a massive cannon pointed forward that fires shells as large as a human. Its arms might end in power claws that can tear through armor or crude but effective mega weapons that spray devastating firepower. Its head section might house multiple gun platforms, each manned by gun crews eager to contribute to the destruction. Some Gargants even mount smaller weapons all over their hulls, turning them into mobile fortresses that can engage enemies at any angle. What makes Gargants particularly terrifying is that they're not just weapons platforms. They're symbols, representations of Ork power and the favor of their gods. When a war boss commissions a Gargant, they're making a statement about their strength and ambition. The construction of a Gargant draws orcs from across a sector, all wanting to contribute to or witness the creation of such a mighty war machine. The gestalt field around a major Gargant project becomes incredibly strong, which in turn makes the construction process easier and faster than it should be, creating yet another feedback loop. Orc aircraft are another category entirely. They look like they should never fly. They're overweight, poorly balanced, and powered by engines that seem barely adequate for the task, and yet they do fly somehow, soaring through the atmosphere to drop bombs on enemies or engage in dogfights with more sophisticated aircraft. Orc fighters are incredibly maneuverable because they're not constrained by concerns like pilot safety or structural integrity. An Orc pilot will pull turns that would rip the wings off most aircraft, secure in the knowledge that the gestalt field and pure Orc toughness will see them through. Bombers are even more improbable, massive aircraft that seem to defy gravity through nothing but determination and the belief that they should be able to fly. They lumber through the air, their bomb bays full of crude explosives, and rain destruction on enemies below. The fact that they make it back to base maybe half the time is considered an acceptable loss rate by Orc standards. Then there's Orc naval power, as the space hulks and fleet ships that carry the green tide between stars. Orc vessels are built along similar principles to their ground vehicles: maximum firepower, minimal concern for anything resembling aesthetics or efficiency. They bristle with guns, some of which are clearly captured from other species and bolted on wherever they fit. They're powered by engines that would make an Imperial tech priest weep, and they're crewed by thousands of Orcs who view space travel as just another opportunity for a good fight. Space hulks in particular are fascinating. These are massive conglomerations of ships, asteroids, and debris that have been fused together by Orc mech boys into something approaching a functional vessel. They shouldn't be able to fly. They certainly shouldn't be able to enter or exit warp space, but they do. Because enough Orcs believe they can, and the gestalt field makes that belief reality. The weapons Orcs use are equally impossible. A typical Orc shooter might be assembled from parts of 3 different guns, held together with rivets and faith. The barrel might not be perfectly straight. The firing mechanism might be crude in the extreme. But when an Orc pulls the trigger, it fires, spitting out shells with enough force to kill whatever's on the receiving end. Bigger weapons are even more ridiculous. The Orc def gun looks like someone took a piece of pipe, attached it to a power source that's clearly inadequate, and hoped for the best. The shock attack gun, one of the most feared Orc weapons, works by opening a portal through the warp and launching snotlings through it, and the poor creatures being driven mad by exposure to the warp before exploding out the other end as living missiles. This shouldn't work on multiple levels. The physics are wrong. The engineering is inadequate. The biological component should be insufficient. And yet it does work, because mech boys believe it will, and that's apparently good enough for the universe. What Imperial scholars find most frustrating is that captured Orc technology often fails to function when examined or used by non-Orcs. A weapon that worked perfectly fine in Orc hands becomes an inert lump of metal when held by a human. This has led to extensive debate about whether Orc technology actually works through mechanical means, or if it's purely sustained by the gestalt field. The truth seems to be somewhere in the middle. There is genuine mechanical function in Orc devices, crude but real engineering. But it's supplemented, enhanced, and made reliable by the gestalt field. This makes Orc technology simultaneously the most advanced and the most primitive in the galaxy. Advanced because it works despite violating numerous physical laws. Primitive because it's held together with literal bolts and faith. It's technology that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics and engineering. And yet it does exist, and it's remarkably effective at its intended purpose, destroying things. The mech boys themselves are endlessly inventive, constantly coming up with new variations and improvements to their creations. A particularly talented mech boy might develop a new weapon or vehicle design that spreads across Orc society as other mechs copy or adapt the innovation. This happens without any formal system of patents or technical documentation. Mechs simply see what works and incorporate those principles into their own creations, guided by their instinctive understanding of mechanics. Some big mechs become legendary for their creations. They might build a unique gargant that becomes famous across a sector. They might develop a particular weapon configuration that other orcs specifically seek out. In rare cases, a big mech might become powerful enough to lead their own warband or even tribe, though this is unusual. Most mechs are content to build and tinker, as leaving the actual fighting to warriors while they focus on maintaining and improving the tools those warriors use. The relationship between orc warriors and their technology is unique. They don't worship their machines like the Adeptus Mechanicus or carefully maintain them according to sacred rituals. They use them hard, abuse them terribly, and expect them to keep working through sheer orcish stubbornness. And somehow, it works out. An orc vehicle might be running on 2 cylinders, leaking oil from a dozen places, and held together more by rust than rivets, but it'll keep going until it either wins the battle or explodes spectacularly, whichever comes first. This attitude toward technology is liberating in a way. Orcs don't fear their machines or treat them with excessive reverence. They're tools. They're weapons to be used and discarded when they fail. This allows orcs to take risks with their equipment that other species wouldn't dare. They'll push engines past their theoretical maximum. They'll overload weapons to get just one more shot. They'll repair damage with whatever's available, not concerning themselves with whether the repair is proper by anyone else's standards. The result is a technological base that's incredibly robust despite appearing incredibly fragile. Yes, individual pieces of orc equipment break down regularly, but they're easy to fix with salvaged parts. They're easy to replace because mech boys can build new ones from scrap. And most importantly, they're effective enough to win battles, which is the only metric that matters to orcs. In the end, orc technology is perhaps the perfect expression of orc nature. Crude, brutal, seemingly haphazard, but ultimately effective. It doesn't need to be elegant. It doesn't need to follow established engineering principles. It just needs to work long enough to help kill the enemy, and the Gestalt field ensures that it does exactly that. The machines of the mechs are impossible, ridiculous, and terrifying in equal measure. Perfect weapons for a species that was designed to make war eternal. Legends in green. The greatest orc warlords. Throughout the long history of the galaxy, certain names emerge from the green tide that carry weight far beyond their species. These are the orc warlords whose campaigns have shaken entire sectors, whose very names cause human military commanders to pause, whose legends persist long after their deaths. To understand the true power of the orcs, we must examine these exceptional individuals, for they represent what orcs can become when all their advantages align: size, intelligence, charisma, and the amplifying effect of the Gestalt field. The greatest and most ancient of these legends is known simply as the Beast, though in truth this title referred not to a single warlord, but to a collection of 6 prime orcs, each larger and more powerful than any orc seen before or since. The Beast emerged in the 32nd Millennium, during a period known to the Imperium as the War of the Beast, and it came closer to destroying humanity than any threat since the Horus Heresy. The orcs of the Beast's era were different from the orcs of today. They were larger, approaching the size of the ancient Krork. They were more organized, capable of strategic thinking and long-term planning on a scale rarely seen among greenskins. They had technology that rivaled anything the Imperium possessed, including massive attack moons that could travel through space and orbital weapons of devastating power. And most terrifyingly, they were united under a common purpose in a way that orcs rarely achieve. The Beast-class orcs stood at least 10 meters tall, towering figures encased in armor that made them nearly invulnerable. They spoke fluent Gothic, the common language of the Imperium, showing intelligence that should have been impossible for orcs. They negotiated, they planned, they executed strategic campaigns that stretched across dozens of systems. In many ways, they were closer to the original Krork than to modern orcs, representing what the species had once been at the height of its power. The War of the Beast nearly ended the Imperium. Attack moons appeared throughout Imperial space, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. The Orks swallowed whole sectors, their advance so rapid and so overwhelming that the Imperium struggled to mount any effective resistance. For the first time since the Horus Heresy, Terra itself came under direct attack. An Ork assault force breached the defenses of the Throne World, and for a brief, terrible period, greenskins fought in the streets of humanity's capital. The Imperial response to this threat required desperate measures. The entire Imperial Fists chapter was nearly destroyed in the early battles. Other Space Marine chapters were called upon to reinforce the defense of Imperial space. Yet the Primarch Vulcan himself emerged from wherever he had been hiding and joined the war, engaging the beast in single combat that nearly killed them both. The Sisters of Silence were deployed to use their anti-psychic abilities against Ork weirdboys, and ultimately, it took a coordinated assault by multiple chapters and the use of captured Ork technology to finally defeat the beast. Even then, victory was uncertain. Each time a Prime Ork fell, it seemed that another would take its place. The Orks had redundancy built into their leadership structure, ensuring that the loss of any single leader wouldn't stop their advance. It was only through a psychic attack, using a captured Ork weirdboy and the Sisters of Silence to create a reverse Gestalt effect, that the final Prime Ork was killed. And even then, the Orks didn't truly lose. They simply scattered, their great crusade breaking down into smaller groups that faded back into the galaxy to regroup and rebuild. The legacy of the beast haunts the Imperium to this day. It demonstrated that Orks could be far more than the crude savages they're usually dismissed as. It showed that under the right circumstances, with sufficient unity and purpose, the greenskins could threaten the very existence of humanity. And most worryingly, it proved that the beast wasn't unique. The potential exists within Ork genetics for such beings to emerge again. The question isn't if, but when. Fast forward to the 41st millennium, and we encounter perhaps the most dangerous Ork alive today, Gazgkul Mag Uruk Thraka. His name, which roughly translates to Metal Skull Great Ork Ruler, is known across the galaxy and spoken with fear by those who understand what he represents. Gazgkul is not just another war boss. He's a prophet, a visionary, and possibly the next beast. Gazgkul's rise began on the frozen world of Urk, where he was just another Ork warrior in the forces of a Death Skull war boss named Dregmek. During a battle against automated defenses left behind by Space Marines, Gazgkul took a bolter round to the head that destroyed 30% of his skull and pulped significant portions of his brain. By all rights, this should have killed him. Instead, he was found by the infamous pain boy known as Mad Doc Grotznik, who rebuilt his skull with adamantium plating and somehow managed to keep him alive. When Gazgkul awoke from his surgery, he was changed. He claimed to hear the voices of the Ork gods Gork and Mork, telling him that he had been chosen for a great purpose. These visions told him to unite all Orks under his banner, to gather a crusade like no other, and to bring war to the entire galaxy. Whether these visions were genuine divine communication, hallucinations caused by his brain damage, or something else entirely is unclear. What matters is that Gazgkul believed them utterly, and his belief, amplified through the Gestalt field, began to draw other Orks to him. Gazgkul proved to be not just physically imposing, but also remarkably intelligent and strategic for an Ork. He challenged and defeated warboss Dregmek, taking control of his forces. He then proceeded to unite the warring Ork tribes of Urk through a combination of combat prowess and political maneuvering, something nearly unheard of among Orks. When a Space Hulk arrived in the system, providing a means to leave the dying world, Gazgkul was ready with a unified Ork force to board it. What followed was a campaign that would terrify the Imperium for decades. Gazgkul led his forces first against the world of Armageddon, a crucial hive world that produced much of the Imperium's military equipment. The Second War for Armageddon saw Gazgkul's forces nearly overwhelm the planet's defenses. Only the intervention of multiple Space Marine chapters, including the Ultramarines and Blood Angels, and the tactical genius of an old commissar named Yarrick, prevented complete disaster. Even then, it took the entire defensive force working together to drive Ghazghkull off, and he left with most of his forces intact. What made Ghazghkull particularly dangerous was his strategic thinking. Unlike most Ork war bosses, who simply charge at the nearest enemy, Ghazghkull planned his campaigns carefully. He used captured teleporter technology, Ork teleportation devices, to deploy troops exactly where they could do maximum damage. He lured enemies into traps. He feinted and maneuvered, behaviors more expected from human commanders than Ork warlords. His tactical acumen combined with Ork strength and numbers made him nearly unstoppable. After the Second War for Armageddon, Ghazghkull wasn't finished. He gathered more forces and launched the Third War for Armageddon, an even larger conflict that drew in forces from across the Imperium. This war raged for years, consuming untold lives and resources on both sides. Ghazghkull brought thousands of Stompers to Armageddon, overwhelming the planet's defenses through sheer mass of war machines. He coordinated multiple fronts, managed logistics on a scale that should have been beyond any Ork, and generally demonstrated capabilities that made him one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Eventually, Ghazghkull left Armageddon again, not because he was defeated, but because he got bored with the stalemate that had developed. This casual abandonment of a campaign that had consumed years of effort and countless lives perfectly encapsulates the Ork mentality. If it's not fun anymore, move on to the next fight. He departed into the galaxy, leaving his subordinates to continue the war while he sought bigger challenges. His most recent activities have been even more concerning. Ghazghkull traveled to the Octarius system, where a massive war was ongoing between Orks and Tyranids. His arrival turned what was already a brutal conflict into a galaxy-threatening situation. He united the disparate Ork forces, turning them from a loose collection of tribes into something approaching a coordinated army. The fighting intensified dramatically, with both Orks and Tyranids growing stronger from the constant warfare. Ghazghkull has stated that his ultimate goal is to unite all Orks under his banner, to create a crusade so massive that it will consume the entire galaxy. He believes, or at least claims to believe, that the Ork gods Gork and Mork will manifest in real space when enough Orks gather under his leadership. Whether this is possible is unknown, but what is certain is that Ghazghkull is drawing Orks to him from across the galaxy. The Gestalt field around him is incredibly strong, and it grows stronger with each victory. What makes Ghazghkull particularly terrifying is not just his current power, but his potential. He's already grown to enormous size, rivaling the largest war bosses in Ork history. He's already demonstrated intelligence and strategic capability beyond almost any other Ork. And he's still getting bigger, still getting smarter, still gathering more followers. Some Imperial scholars believe he's approaching the level of the beast, that he represents the next stage in the recurring cycle of Ork evolution. If they're right, if Ghazghkull continues to grow and develop, he could become the single greatest threat the Imperium faces. Whilst there have been other notable Ork warlords throughout history, though none quite as prominent as the Beast or Ghazghkull. Warlord Snagrod led a crusade that devastated the Crimson Fist chapter, nearly destroying one of the Imperium's most venerable Space Marine forces. He showed unusual tactical sophistication, using strategies borrowed from human military doctrine to eliminate the Crimson Fist's ability to call for help before launching his main assault. Nazdreg Ug Erdgrub is a Bad Moon's warlord known for his immense wealth and dangerous intelligence. He's smart enough that if he were more interested in conquest than in accumulating treasure, he could potentially rival Ghazghkull as a threat. As it is, he's content to raid and loot, building his personal fortune and occasionally selling his services to other war bosses. He was the one who traded teleporter technology to Ghazghkull, enabling many of the latter's most successful campaigns. The Overfiend of Octarius led one of the largest Ork empires in the galaxy before the Tyranids arrived. His realm covered numerous systems and contained billions of Orks. While not as individually impressive as Ghazghkull, The Overfiend demonstrated that orcs could maintain a relatively stable empire over extended periods, governing, in the orc sense, multiple worlds and coordinating their defense against external threats. Each of these warlords, and countless others whose names have been lost to history, represent the same fundamental truth about orcs. Given the right circumstances, they can produce leaders who combine physical power with genuine intelligence and strategic capability. These aren't the crude brutes that imperial propaganda often depicts. They're dangerous, sophisticated opponents who happen to also be incredibly strong and backed by millions of fanatically loyal warriors. The pattern that emerges from studying these great warlords is concerning. Each one represents an orc growing closer to the ancient Krork ideal. Each one demonstrates capabilities that exceed what orcs should theoretically be capable of, and each one draws more orcs to them, their success feeding the Gestalt field and enabling even greater success in a feedback loop that can spiral into galaxy-threatening proportions. The Imperium has no good answer for these figures. You can defeat their armies, but unless you kill the warlord himself, he'll just gather more followers and try again. You can kill the warlord, but another will rise to take his place, possibly even stronger than the one you defeated. The cycle continues, generation after generation, with each turn of the wheel potentially producing the next existential threat to galactic civilization. And perhaps most terrifying of all, somewhere in the galaxy right now, there might be a young orc, recently spawned, that will grow to become the next great warlord. They might be fighting in some obscure conflict on a backwater world, slowly growing larger with each victory, drawing other orcs to them through the Gestalt field, beginning the long ascent to become the next beast, the next Gazkul, the next legend that will make the galaxy tremble. There's no way to predict where or when this will happen. It's simply an inevitable consequence of orc biology and culture. The great warlords will continue to emerge, and each time they do, the galaxy will suffer for it. Campaigns of carnage, the galaxy ablaze. To truly appreciate the scale of the orc threat, we must examine the great campaigns, the moments when the green tide rose high enough to threaten entire sectors, or even the very existence of major civilizations. These aren't small raids or minor conflicts. These are wars that reshape the political and military landscape of the galaxy, that consume billions of lives, that push the greatest military forces in the galaxy to their absolute limits. We've already touched on the War of the Beast in our discussion of that legendary warlord, but it bears deeper examination because it represents perhaps the closest the orcs have come to actually conquering the galaxy. In the 32nd millennium, when the Imperium was still recovering from the Horus heresy and consolidating its power, the orcs struck with unprecedented coordination and force. The war began slowly, with increasing reports of orc activity in various sectors. At first, this seemed like typical greenskin raiding, nothing that demanded special attention. But as more information came in, Imperial commanders began to realize this was different. The orcs weren't just attacking randomly. They were following a plan, coordinating their assaults, systematically targeting strategic locations. Then the attack moons appeared. These were artificial satellites, massive constructs that had been engineered by orc mech boys working on a scale that shouldn't have been possible. Each attack moon was large enough to house billions of orcs and mounted weapons capable of destroying fleets or devastating planets. They could travel through the warp, appearing without warning in Imperial systems, and they were nearly impossible to stop once they arrived. The Imperial fists, who had served as the Emperor's Praetorians for centuries, responded to the initial threat. They deployed to the world of Ardamantua to deal with what they thought was a conventional orc invasion. Instead, they found themselves facing the beast's forces in their full glory. The entire chapter, one of the most venerable and powerful space marine forces in existence, was nearly wiped out. Only a handful of survivors managed to escape and bring warning back to Terra. The war escalated from there, Entire sectors fell to the Ork advance, as the attack moons appeared throughout Imperial space, each one serving as a mobile fortress from which the beast's forces could launch devastating assaults. The Orks weren't just stronger and more numerous than expected, they were smarter, better organized, and equipped with technology that in some ways surpassed Imperial capabilities. Most shocking of all was what happened next. An Ork assault on Terra itself. The Greenskins breached the defenses of the throne world, the heart of the Imperium, the one place that was supposed to be absolutely secure. Orks fought in the streets of humanity's capital. An attack moon positioned itself in orbit over Terra, its weapons trained on the Imperial palace. For a brief, terrible period, it seemed like the Imperium might actually fall. The response required everything the Imperium could muster. The Last Wall Protocol was activated, calling all successor chapters of the Imperial Fists to Terra to reform the Legion. The Adeptus Mechanicus provided their most powerful weapons. The Sisters of Silence, who had been thought lost, emerged from hiding to join the war. And Vulcan, one of the lost Primarchs, appeared on a battlefield to personally engage the beast in combat. The fighting raged across multiple fronts. Ulanor, the world that had been the site of Horus's greatest triumph during the Great Crusade, had to be invaded 3 times before the Orks could be dislodged. Each invasion cost thousands of Space Marine lives. The final assault on the beast required a psychic attack using captured Ork technology, essentially turning the Gestalt field against itself to kill the Prime Ork leading the crusade. Even after the beast was defeated, even after the attack moons were destroyed and the Ork forces scattered, the war left scars that would never fully heal. Entire Space Marine chapters had been reduced to handfuls of survivors. Whole sectors had been depopulated. The political structure of the Imperium had been shaken, leading to reforms and power struggles that would echo for millennia. And most importantly, the Imperium had learned that the Orks could be far, far more dangerous than anyone had previously believed. The Wars for Armageddon represent another series of conflicts that demonstrate the persistence and power of Ork forces. Armageddon is a crucial hive world in the Imperium, producing massive amounts of military equipment and serving as a strategic lynchpoint in its region. It's also, for some reason, a world that attracts Ork attention like no other. The first war for Armageddon actually had nothing to do with Orks, being instead an incursion by Chaos forces led by a demon Primarch. But the second and third wars were purely Ork affairs, and they were brutal beyond imagination. The second war for Armageddon began when Gaz-Kul Mag Uruk Thraka arrived in the system at the head of a massive crusade. His forces quickly overwhelmed the planet's orbital defenses and began landing troops by the millions. The initial assault was devastating, with entire hive cities falling before the green tide within days. What made this war particularly interesting was the personal rivalry that developed between Gaz-Kul and Commissar Yarrick, an old human officer who became the symbol of Imperial resistance on Armageddon. Yarrick was everything a commissar should be, absolutely fearless, tactically brilliant, and capable of inspiring troops to fight on even when all hope seemed lost. He organized the defense of Armageddon against impossible odds, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. The war raged for years, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory. The Orks couldn't quite overcome the Imperial defenses, and the Imperials couldn't push the Orks completely off the planet. Eventually, with the arrival of Space Marine reinforcements including forces from the Blood Angels, Ultramarines, and Salamanders chapters, the Imperials were able to launch a counteroffensive that drove Gaz-Kul's forces back to their landing zones. But Gaz-Kul wasn't defeated. He left Armageddon with most of his forces intact, including the bulk of his war machines and his best troops. He'd lost this particular campaign, but only because he chose to leave, and he promised to return. It was a disturbing demonstration of Ork resilience and strategic thinking. 57 years later, true to his word, Gaz-Kul returned. The third war for Armageddon was even larger than the second, with Gaz-Kul bringing forces that had been reinforced and re-equipped during the intervening years. He'd learned from the previous war, adapting his tactics and bringing new weapons, including thousands of stompers. This war dragged on for years, consuming unimaginable resources on both sides. The fighting was so intense that entire hive cities were reduced to ruins. The planet's industrial capacity was crippled. Millions of soldiers, both human and orc, had died in the endless, grinding combat. And still neither side could achieve victory. Eventually, Ghazghkull again withdrew from Armageddon. This time, not because he was losing, but because he'd grown bored with the stalemate. He left his subordinates to continue the fight and departed to seek new challenges elsewhere in the galaxy. The Third War for Armageddon officially continues to this day, with Orc and Imperial forces still battling over the ruins of what was once one of the Imperium's most productive worlds. The Octarius War represents a different kind of Orc conflict, one that's perhaps even more worrying in its implications. This war began as a deliberate action by Inquisitor Cryptman, who was desperately trying to slow the advance of Tyranid Hive Fleet Leviathan. And his plan was to redirect the Tyranids toward the Orc Empire of Octarius, reasoning that the two most dangerous Xeno species in the galaxy could weaken each other, while the Imperium recovered its strength. The plan worked too well. The Orcs of Octarius, led by their Overfiend, were initially delighted to have such challenging opponents. The Tyranids, for their part, found themselves in their ideal environment, constant warfare against aggressive foes in a target-rich biosphere. And so began a war that has consumed an entire sector and continues to escalate year by year. What makes the Octarius War particularly dangerous is that both sides are growing stronger from the conflict. The Orcs are getting bigger and tougher with each battle, their constant fighting triggering the biological responses that make them more formidable warriors. And some reports indicate that Orc boys in Octarius are now as large as typical knobs, and their knobs are approaching warboss size. Meanwhile, the Tyranids are adapting to Orc tactics and biology, evolving new organisms specifically designed to fight greenskins. When Ghazghkull arrived in Octarius, he further upset the balance. He united the disparate Orc tribes under his command, turning what had been a chaotic free-for-all into something approaching a coordinated campaign. This gave the Orcs significant advantages over the Tyranids, who now faced not just overwhelming numbers, but actual strategic direction. The concern among Imperial strategists is what happens when one side finally wins. If the Tyranids triumph, they'll have consumed the biomass of billions of Orcs and will emerge as a hive fleet larger and more dangerous than before. As if the Orcs win, they'll have grown to massive size through years of constant warfare and will likely burst out of Octarius to rampage across the galaxy. Either way, neighboring Imperial sectors face a terrible threat. The Octarius War has also drawn forces from both sides across a wide region. Orcs are flocking to Octarius from light years away, drawn by the promise of the best fight in the galaxy. Tyranid splinter fleets are redirecting toward the sector, adding their biomass to the conflict. The war has become a gravitational center, pulling in forces that might otherwise have threatened other regions. Beyond these major campaigns, there have been countless smaller wars and raids. Orc crusades are a constant threat throughout the galaxy. A warboss on some obscure world might gather enough followers to threaten an entire subsector. Freebooter fleets might raid commerce lanes, disrupting trade across multiple systems. Even feral Orcs on primitive worlds can pose significant threats to nearby civilizations. What these campaigns demonstrate is the fundamental nature of the Orc threat. It never truly ends. You can defeat an Orc army, drive them from a world, even kill their warlord. But unless you sterilize every planet they touched, eliminating every single spore they left behind, they'll be back. Maybe not immediately, maybe not for decades or even centuries, but eventually. The spores will grow, new Orcs will spawn, and the cycle will begin again. This persistence, combined with their biological and psychic advantages, makes Orcs perhaps the most ineradicable threat in the galaxy. The Tyranids can theoretically be starved by denying them biomass. Chaos can be fought with faith and psychic defenses. The Necrons can be avoided by not disturbing their tomb worlds. But the orcs are everywhere, constantly spawning new generations, always ready for another fight. You cannot negotiate with them, cannot reason with them, cannot even rely on them fighting amongst themselves, because the moment a strong enough leader emerges, they'll unite against external foes. Every major campaign in galactic history has included orc forces somewhere in the conflict. They're like a constant background radiation of violence, always present, always fighting, always threatening to escalate into something truly dangerous. The great campaigns we've discussed are just the most visible examples, the times when the green tide rose high enough that it couldn't be ignored. But for every major crusade, there are thousands of smaller conflicts, countless minor wars that grind on generation after generation with no resolution in sight. The orcs are patient in their own way. Not individually, orcs aren't known for their patience, but as a species. They can afford to lose battles, even lose wars, because they'll always come back. Their reproductive cycle ensures it, their biology guarantees it, and their joy in combat means they'll never stop trying. For them, war isn't a burden or a necessary evil. It's the purpose of existence, the reason they were created, the only thing that truly matters. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the orcs have found their paradise, and they're never, ever going to let anyone take it from them. At the eternal threat, why orcs can never be defeated. As we near the end of our exploration of orc power, we must confront the most disturbing truth about these green-skinned warriors. They cannot be permanently defeated, not in any meaningful sense, not through any method currently available to the civilizations of the galaxy. The orcs are, by design and by nature, the perfect self-perpetuating threat, a species that will endure as long as there are worlds to fight on and enemies to fight against. Let's start with the most fundamental reason for this: their reproductive system. When you kill an orc, you're not reducing their numbers in any permanent way. You're planting the seeds for the next generation. Every dead orc releases millions of spores, and each of those spores can potentially grow into a new orc or other organisms that support orc society. Unless you completely sterilize every square meter of ground where orcs have died, unless you burn the very soil and atmosphere to ash, you haven't actually eliminated them. You've just delayed them. This creates an impossible situation for anyone trying to defend against orc incursions. Win a battle? Great. You've just ensured that this world will have an orc problem in 10 or 20 years when the spores mature. Lose a battle? Even worse, because now there are living orcs establishing settlements and fighting amongst themselves, releasing even more spores. The only winning move is to not let orcs land on your world in the first place. And given how numerous they are and how spread throughout the galaxy, that's not a realistic option for most civilizations. The Imperium has tried various methods to deal with orc infestations. They've used virus bombs, weapons that kill all biological life and theoretically would include orc spores. But some spores inevitably survive in underground caves or deep soil where the virus doesn't penetrate. They've used massive fires, burning continents to ash in hopes of destroying the spore colonies. But again, some always survive, protected by depth of earth or fortuitous environmental conditions. They've even resorted to exterminatus, the ultimate sanction of destroying an entire planet, and even that doesn't always work if the orcs have already spread to other worlds in the system. The situation is made worse by how orcs spread between worlds. They don't need sophisticated spacecraft or complex navigation systems. They pile into ramshackle ships, point themselves at distant stars, and trust that the Gestalt field and mech boy ingenuity will get them where they want to go. Many of these vessels don't survive the journey, true, but enough do that orc populations appear with surprising regularity on worlds that thought themselves safe. Space hulks are a particular problem. These massive conglomerations of wrecked ships drift through space, sometimes entering and exiting the warp apparently at random. Many space hulks are infested with orcs who live aboard them, raiding whatever systems the hulk happens to drift through. You can't hunt down every space hulk. There are too many of them, scattered across too vast a region. Each one is a potential orc incursion waiting to happen. But the orcs' tolerance for different environments makes containment even more difficult. They can survive and fight effectively in almost any climate or condition. Frozen ice worlds, burning deserts, toxic wastelands, even the vacuum of space for short periods. None of these are significant obstacles to orc colonization. Where humans need extensive life support and carefully managed environments, orcs simply adapt. Their hybrid biology and robust physiology let them thrive in places where most other species would quickly die. Then there's the problem of their military effectiveness. Even setting aside their biological advantages and psychic abilities, orcs are genuinely dangerous fighters. They're physically stronger than most humanoids, able to shrug off wounds that would incapacitate others, and utterly fearless in combat. An individual orc might not be as skilled as a trained human soldier, but they don't need to be. They're tough enough to walk through fire that would kill humans, strong enough to tear through armor with their bare hands, and numerous enough that even killing dozens of them might not be sufficient to stop an attack. And when orcs gather in large numbers, their effectiveness increases dramatically. The Gestalt field makes them stronger, tougher, and better coordinated. Their weapons become more reliable. Their vehicles work better. Even their tactics improve as the collective psychic consciousness subtly guides them toward more effective approaches. A small orc warband might be a manageable threat. A massive orc crusade numbering in the millions is one of the most dangerous military forces in the galaxy. The fact that orcs actively enjoy fighting makes them even more persistent. Many species view war as a necessary evil, something to be endured and ended as quickly as possible. Orcs view war as the highest form of entertainment, the best possible way to spend their time. They don't need motivation to fight. They don't suffer from morale problems or war weariness. They don't ask questions about why they're fighting or whether the cause is just. They fight because fighting is fun, and as long as they're having fun, they'll keep doing it. This attitude means that orcs will never stop. You can't negotiate peace with them because they don't want peace. You can't offer them something they value more than warfare, because there is nothing they value more than warfare. Yet you can't tire them out or break their spirit because they're having the time of their lives. The only way to stop an orc attack is to kill every single orc involved, and even then, you're just setting yourself up for the next generation to try again. The emergence of great warlords represents another form of persistent threat. As we've discussed, orcs periodically produce leaders of exceptional capability. These war bosses grow larger and smarter than their fellows, unite disparate tribes, and lead crusades that threaten entire sectors. You can kill one of these warlords, and many have been killed, but you can't prevent new ones from emerging. It's simply a consequence of orc biology and culture. Successful orcs grow bigger. Bigger orcs become leaders. And sometimes those leaders grow big enough and smart enough to become galaxy-level threats. The cycle is self-reinforcing. A rising war boss leads successful campaigns, which makes them grow larger, which attracts more followers through the Gestalt field, which makes their campaigns more successful, which makes them grow even larger. Once this feedback loop starts, it's incredibly difficult to stop. Even killing the war boss might just mean that one of their subordinates, now tested in battle and benefiting from the momentum of the existing crusade, steps up to take their place. Kazkul, Mag, Uruk Thraka is the current example of this phenomenon, but he won't be the last. Somewhere in the galaxy, there's probably an orc who will eventually surpass him. Maybe they're a young warrior now, just beginning their climb up the hierarchy. Or maybe they haven't even spawned yet, still dormant in spore form. But they're coming, as surely as the tide. It's only a question of when and where. The strategic situation is equally concerning. Orcs are spread throughout the galaxy, present in virtually every sector in varying numbers. They don't have a single homeworld that could be targeted. They don't have critical infrastructure that could be destroyed. They don't have a centralized command structure that could be decapitated. They're everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously dispersed and concentrated, a threat that cannot be eliminated, because there's no central point to attack. Even if, by some miracle, you could organize a galaxy-wide campaign to eliminate all orcs simultaneously, sterilizing every world they inhabit and hunting down every space hulk they infest, you'd miss some. Hidden in the depths of space, on remote worlds that haven't been catalogued, in the bellies of drifting asteroids somewhere, orc spores would survive. And from those survivors, the species would rebuild, because that's what they were designed to do. The old ones created a perfect weapon, one that requires no support structure, no supply lines, no sophisticated technology to maintain. Orcs are self-sufficient in the most literal sense. They can generate their own food through photosynthesis. They can reproduce without technology or social organization. They can fight with weapons made from scrap metal and faith. They don't need anything except enemies to fight and time to grow. This makes them fundamentally different from any other major threat in the galaxy. The Tyranids can be fought by denying them biomass and destroying their fleet components. Chaos requires the warp to maintain its physical manifestations and can be combated through faith and psychic defense. The Necrons are powerful but limited in number and can be avoided by not disturbing their tomb worlds. But the Orks, they're everywhere, constantly reproducing, always ready to fight, and they cannot be permanently reduced in number through any conventional military action. The only reason the Orks haven't already conquered the galaxy is that they spend so much time fighting each other. When not united under a powerful war boss, Orc tribes war amongst themselves with the same enthusiasm they bring to fighting external enemies. This internal conflict serves as a pressure valve, a bleeding off Orc aggression that might otherwise be directed at other civilizations. But it also means that the Orc threat can suddenly spike when a unifying figure emerges, bringing these fractious tribes together into a unified force. The Imperium's strategy for dealing with Orcs is essentially damage control. They respond to major incursions, try to contain the spread of spores, and eliminate war bosses before they become too powerful. But it's a reactive strategy, a never-ending game of whack-a-mole where you hit one threat only to have another pop up elsewhere. There's no path to victory, no endgame where the Orc threat is eliminated. There's only the eternal struggle to keep them from becoming overwhelming. And here's the truly disturbing part. In the current state of the galaxy, the Orcs are only getting stronger. As the galaxy in the 42nd Millennium is consumed by warfare on a scale rarely seen before. The opening of the Great Rift, the return of the Primarchs, the massive Tyranid invasions, the expansion of Chaos forces. All of this creates perfect conditions for Orcs to thrive. More warfare means more opportunities for Orcs to grow through combat. More conflict means more Orcs are drawn together into large gatherings, strengthening the Gestalt field. More chaos means less organized resistance to Orc incursions. The Orcs are winning in their own way. Not winning in the sense of conquering territory or establishing lasting civilizations. They've never been interested in either of those things. But winning in the sense that they're getting exactly what they want, endless opportunities for the best fights imaginable. And the galaxy is becoming increasingly Orc-friendly, and given their nature, that's perhaps the most terrifying prospect of all. Looking to the future, if you can call it that, in a setting where there is no true future, only an eternal present of warfare, the Orc threat will persist and likely intensify. As long as there are worlds to fight on, species to fight against, and opportunities for combat, the Orcs will be there. They cannot be eliminated, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be contained. They are the green tide, and the tide never stops rising. It only pauses between waves, gathering strength for the next surge. The old ones are long dead, their great civilization reduced to ruins and fragments of legend. But their greatest weapon endures, perpetually renewed, eternally dangerous, perfect in its terrible purpose. The Orcs remain, and they will remain long after most other civilizations have fallen. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, they are home. And nothing short of the death of the universe itself will change that fundamental truth. Conclusion. We've journeyed through the history, biology, and culture of perhaps the most persistent threat the galaxy has ever known. We've examined their ancient origins as Krork, created by the Old Ones to fight in the war in heaven. We've explored their remarkable biology, the fusion of animal and fungus that gives them abilities no other species can match. We've witnessed the power of their Gestalt psychic field, which allows them to reshape reality through collective belief. We've surveyed their society and the diverse clans that compose it. We've marveled at their impossible technology that works through faith and crude engineering. We've met the legendary warlords whose names echo across millennia. And we've witnessed the great campaigns that have shaped galactic history. Through all of this, one truth emerges. The Orks are perfect. Not perfect in an aesthetic or moral sense, but perfect in their function. They are exactly what the Old Ones designed them to be. Warriors who need no support structure, who reproduce effortlessly, who thrive in conditions that would destroy most species, and who genuinely love the act of warfare that defines their existence. They are biological weapons of mass destruction, and unlike most weapons, they never become obsolete, never need maintenance, never lose their edge. In the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity struggles to maintain its grip on a galaxy that seems determined to destroy it, where ancient evils rise from their long sleep, where extragalactic horrors devour worlds, where the very gods of chaos reach out from the warp to corrupt and destroy, the Orks persist. They are not the strongest force in the galaxy. They are not the smartest or the most advanced. But they are, perhaps, the most enduring, because they don't need to be strong or smart or advanced. They just need to be Orks, and that is somehow enough. The green tide will continue to rise. Great warlords will emerge to unite the tribes. Crusades will sweep across sectors, leaving destruction in their wake. And no matter how many times they're defeated, no matter how many times their armies are scattered and their war bosses killed, they'll be back. Because the spores never die, the species never forgets, and the joy of warfare never fades. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the power of the Orks, into what makes these green-skinned warriors such an enduring threat to the galaxy, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore in the rich lore of Warhammer 40,000. So many other factions and forces that shape this dark future. Join us for future explorations of this fascinating universe, and together we'll continue to uncover the stories that make this setting so compelling. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And wherever there is war, there are Orks, ready to fight, eager to prove their strength, and absolutely loving every minute of it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any, and yeah, sleep well.